my name is Sabrina, and today I'm going to introduce classical schools and Keynesian schools and talk about their differences. This is my outline. First of all, I'm going to briefly introduce the classical schools and then the Keynesian schools, and then the comparisons between these two schools from three different aspects. From the shape of long-term aggregate supply, and then the Phillips curve trade-off, and the last one, difference in policy recommendations. And in the policy recommendations, I'm going to take COVID-19 as an example. So first of all, about classical school. Classical economists was developed around the time of 18th and 19th century, and it included the theory of value and distribution. In this school of thought, the value associated with a particular product depends on the various costs that were involved in manufacturing the product. The thing to notice was that the explanation of costs was the same as explanation of distribution. The classical school of economists believed that during the time of crisis, there should be no monetary policy or framework to affect the economy. And then is the Keynesian schools. Keynesian economists was developed by John Maynard Keynes. In the late 1930s, he revolutionized the economic thinking and heavily
in the end, I know
the
what
classical
I did.
school of
I
economists
stopped wasting time
ground
and
of
do
free
things on
trade,
time.
and
Try
he
to seeking
staunchly
for and
supported the
this
idea
success.
of
Live a
government's
noble and honest
intervention
life.
to
Be
protect
honest
the
to myself
economists
and to
from
my
going to
world,
bust.
and the world in
He
my
always
eyes
supported
become
short-term
colorful.
solutions,
Yeah,
and had
that's
thus
all my college
contradicted
life.
the classical school of thought single-handedly. In the views of Keynesian economists, government should intervene in the economy during the time of crisis, introduce various types of policies and regulations so as to make sure that the economy is not suffering. And then we'll move into the comparison. First of all, a distinction between the Keynesian classical view of macroeconomics can be illustrated looking at the long-run aggregate supply. On the left side, it is the classical view of long-run aggregate supply. The classical view is that long-run aggregate supply is inelastic. This has important implications. The classical view suggests that real GDP is determined by supply-side factors, the level of investment, the level of capital, and the productivity of labor, and so on. Classical economists suggest that in the long run, an increase in aggregate demand will just cause inflation and will not increase real GDP. And then on the right side, it is the Keynesian school's view of long-run aggregate supply. The Keynesian view of long-run aggregate supply is different. They argue that the economy can be below full capacity in the long term. Keynesian argues output can be below full capacity for various reasons. First of all, wages are sticky down Keynesian's views, and then there is negative multiplier effect. Once there is a fall in aggregate demand, this causes others who have less income and reduce their spending, creating a negative knock-on effect. And the last, a paradox of threat. In a recession, people lose confidence and therefore by spending less. This causes a further fall in demand. Keynesian suggested by the Philosophers. Classical economists say that in the short term, you might be able to reduce unemployment below the natural rate by increasing aggregate demand, but in the long term, when wages adjust, unemployment will return to the natural rate, and there will be higher inflation. Therefore, there is no trade-off in the long run. However, in the right side of Keynesian schools, they support the idea that there can be a trade-off between employment and inflation. In a recession, increasing aggregate demand will lead to a fall in unemployment, though it may be at the cost of higher inflation rates. And then, before we move into our last comparisons about difference in policy recommendations, let's talk about the COVID-19 situation. First of all, you can see there is a aggregate demand and aggregate supply model, and with a normal one with the green line about aggregate demand. But under the COVID-19 pandemic, the aggregate demand will move left. And how these two schools will suggest government to deal with this problem, we discuss them from 4 different aspects. First of all, government spending. The classical model is suggest the government to not to intervene the managing the economy because they think it is little need to do so. However, in the Keynesian model, they make case for greater levels of government intervention, especially in a recession when there is a need for government spending to offset the fall in private sector investment. And the second one, fiscal policy. Classical economists places little emphasis on the use of fiscal policy to manage aggregate demand. And however, in Keynesian, economists will suggest the government need to use fiscal policy, especially in the recession like COVID-19. And the third one, government borrowing. In the classical view, they will stress the importance of reducing government borrowing and balancing the budget because there is no benefit from higher government spending. Lower taxes will increase economic efficiency, while in the Keynesian's view, they suggest that government borrowing may be necessary because it helps to increase overall aggregate demand. And the fourth one, supply-side policies. The classical view suggests that the most important thing is enabling the free market to operate. This may involve reducing the power of trade unions to prevent wage inflexibility. While in Keynesian view, they don't reject supply-side policies. They just say they may not always be enough. For example, in a deep recession, supply-side policies can't deal with the fundamental problem of lack of demand. And to conclude, the classical schools suggest government to do nothing, while in Keynesian's view, they think government should do something to protect the economy. Thanks for listening.